Welcome to the UDL Principles and Instructional Design 3-part mini podcast series with Amanda, Ivy, Gabby, and Jordan. Throughout this mini episode, we share our thoughts and opinions on UDL principles and how we can relate them to instructional design. Is accessibility the same as accommodations? I feel like in a sense, but not really. I mean, accommodations is made based on what you need during the time, I feel, which accessibility is something you need all the time. I don't know. I feel like you need to make accommodations for people during different learning styles. So that could maybe coincide with UDL. Let's say someone who has severe ADHD needs to go into a learning environment with a way different. You need to make accommodations for them in that learning environment that they can do themselves while they're learning.
I can't really differentiate the difference between accessibility and accommodations, but when I was listening to the podcast about ethical and accessible UDL, it noted something that was like, if it's worth educating everyone. And I'm not sure how to articulate that, but I feel like it resonates with me in that if you're going to offer some sort of knowledge, then it's just like it's worth educating everyone,
Mhm.
no matter who they are. And I think that you should be mindful of invisible disabilities too, because some people might not want
Mm.
to disclose them. Um, Say, for example, like mental health struggles, like you mentioned, Jordan. Um,
Mm.
I think, yeah, it's kind of like a sensitive topic for everyone, but then in the same lens, we all face accessibility concerns, and just to be mindful of that too. So
It's almost like it's like a trickle down effect from accessibility to accommodations, where accessibility is like the umbrella term, and then it goes down into accommodations based off how much is being accessible to you, kind of bridging that all together.
Accessibility are guidelines that are already set
Mhm.
in order to accommodate people say for with learning disabilities, when they go into the classroom, there's already accessibility guidelines that it's in place.
Yeah.
But for example, for accommodation, say something happened, like you're going to miss the deadline because something happened, like an emergency. That's when you make accommodations for the person.
Yeah, it's almost like accessibility is the rule and accommodation is like the exception to the rule.
Uh-huh.
So you have the one thing that happens, but then you always have the outliers that need to be accommodated for based on whatever they're going through at the time. So you have to somehow interconnect that to make it work best for them.
It's interesting to see your thoughts, and for me, accessibility is not the same as accommodations and I don't think you need to have different accessibility needs to have accommodations.
Mhm.
I don't. I'm curious what you guys think about that too. Do you need different? Do you need to have a different ability to have accommodations, or should that be open to everybody? Because to me, accessibility isn't the same as accommodations because they're two very different things. And I think accommodation, kind of to touch on what Gab was saying, that it feels like it's like the guidelines for it gives you structure to ease into the accessibility of things, but that it's kind of two different things to me.
Kind of I see where you're coming from, and that makes a lot of sense. Just putting it to real life things, even if you think about a restaurant and accessibility versus accommodations and stuff like that, I don't know. If you think about a menu, you can always make accommodations to whatever someone needs to eat, like gluten intolerant or stuff. But then you have your restaurants that are dedicated to vegans, glutens, and all that stuff. So they're completely accessible to people with that. But then you have your regular chain restaurants like the Keg or Earl's and stuff, which you make accommodations based off the menu for whatever someone needs.
even the menus in fast food, I remember way back then when I worked at Wendy's, I had someone that was deaf. so they needed a translator to tell me their order. But also in that, when we see fast food menus, there are huge pictures and then the little bit of text too. So it kind of accommodates those that might not even be able to read it or even speak English or, you know, otherwise be able to read. So I think that menu piece was a really great idea, Jordan. And then also, Amanda, your point about how they're not the same. I got that. Like it resonated with me in that like or how do I word it? Like who qualifies for accommodations? But I made sense out of your ramble.
Yeah, and to touch on that, like on the podcast, it was interesting, the point where they brought up that some people just don't feel comfortable talking about their like needing accommodations, and so like how do we make accommodations just something that people know that they can access without having to like to kind of to that stigma of like, you know, accessibility. So
especially circling back to the idea of mental health, like someone might not be comfortable with disclosing their situation or not feel safe, I guess, too. So having some way to like encourage them, like you said, Amanda, to have that accommodation without having that discomfort of telling someone else. I guess we could bring it to our next point, which can any of you think of a course when you had trouble in the past, and would any of the UDL principles have improved your learning experience?
I feel like in like first year gen eds, like they're so like streamlined just to get it done. So I was in like one of these like math ones. I'm not even sure what it was, but like the way he taught was just like just put it on the board and then you know how to do it. But like I literally got a D+ in that class because I could not learn from him at all. Like if he had like other ways of like expressing or like showing the same concept in a different way with like maybe images and like relating it to real life stuff, maybe I could have learned it and I wouldn't have done so bad in it. But like since he was just like, this is the mathematical equation, you need to learn this, here's one assignment, do this, and then hopefully you're good to go. And I just struggled through the whole thing. So it'd been nice like if he like provided with like different ways of like engagement with the course material, ways of like representing the material as well, like explaining like what these symbols meant and like why they were important to you.
I think I had the same experience back in first year when I was taking like a general class. It was very heavy on like doing readings for the entire semester. I figured it was really hard for me to like focus and just like do things, get things done. However, like in some courses like our comm classes where our course materials are like mix of like readings, like videos and websites that we access, I think that's more engaging and I found it more easier for me to learn using like multiple kinds of like course materials.
Makes you way more engaged when you have like a variety of things. Like I found with like even just Gil would always provide like different ways of learning. And I feel like I learned so much in his classes, even though it was like so course like and text heavy, but like he just had a way of like getting it into your brain. And I was just like, wow, how do I know what betweenness centrality means? But like now I do. Because he has like a certain way of teaching and like provides with that information.
I don't know if you guys know what happened to me last year, but I got diagnosed with glaucoma and I actually lost like my vision for most of last year. And I had Gil's class in the fall, which was a bit of a disaster because there was so much reading. And Gil was very helpful. Like he was like, oh, well, you know, like let's find ways to, you know, to get around this. And we ended up like finding a way for me to like do a screen reading text for all of my like readings for his class. And like it's just nice. Like Gil is just an amazing person in general, but you know, like it's nice to have profs that are like, you know what, we'll work together and like accommodate. Like I will never like I'm one of those people that would never go to a like as like to be like I need accommodations. But Gil was like super helpful and he was like helping me find solutions, especially because it was new, like it was a whole new world to me. And so yeah, like I feel like when profs are aware of like ways to implement the UDL principles, it really opens up and it makes it a more inclusive environment. Because I mean, if Gil hadn't have thought of that, like who knows what he would have been like.
To circle back to your piece, like I really empathize with like Gil's empathy too, because he's just like, again, an awesome human overall. But you know, like if it was maybe an inconsiderate prof, they might like look over it or just, you know, see your absence as something else or like slacking off. But the fact that he went out of his way to accommodate that, especially in our program, which is so visual heavy, that,
Yeah.
you know, he recognized that and found a way to work around it. So I love that. I remember in tools, I think for info design with Brad, we had to make a code a whole website. Um, and I had never coded in my life ever. And I tried working through these YouTube tutorials. It wasn't sticking in my head. Every time I looked at a wall of code, I just saw like a wall of text and it wasn't sticking with me. So I think maybe breaking the task down into smaller chunks so that I saw it as, okay, learn how to write a header instead of design the whole website at once, would have helped me in that situation. But even to this day, I can't do any type of coding. What challenges do you think an instructor slash educator slash facilitator might encounter when trying to implement these UDL practices in their learning materials?
I think the biggest challenge that I think would be a roadblock for profs to adjust to the UDL principles is the like maybe the lack of understanding of their audience, and maybe it's just like a matter of lack to understand that, like going back to what Ivy said at the very top was about how not all disabilities are visual. So these are principles that need to be practiced and learnt and just automatically implemented in their work, so that no student has to be like, hey, I have these needs, can you please accommodate? Or it should just be something that profs just automatically do, but it's needing to understand them and find ways to best implement them into their style of teaching.
I was in that position, I would be like very hard on myself to make sure that I like was following all these rules. But you also can't like be perfect. So you have to like, I feel like all you can do is like in that position as a facilitator is just try your best and like be open to like constructive criticism if it comes, because like you can't like do everything like perfectly, which I feel like as long as you're like trying your best and you're kind of got to roll with the punches, I feel, and kind of go with the flow and just work every day at being better and a better version of that for your students.
I think a challenge that an instructor might face too when trying to implement UDL, similar to Amanda's point, like really getting to understand your students, but also it could be vice versa, like the students recognizing that like instructors are humans too, if that makes sense. One's perfect. So even if an instructor like misses a class, say for example, or doesn't teach something that well, recognizing that they might be going through their own struggles too outside of the classroom. In particular, stuck with me these past few years. I guess also in the same vein as invisible barriers too. I struggle with social anxiety, and even though I don't show it externally, I still like feel it internally. So I think I remember in elementary school when I would get report cards, teachers would leave a note saying, Ivy needs to questions. And it was every single year that I would get those. But since I was never brought up to ask questions or speak up about something, I was just never accustomed to asking questions or even questioning something that I'm taught. So I think recognizing that people have different learning styles too might be another encounter, because someone might be quiet but learning in the background. Meanwhile, someone might be really involved. in the process too.
A challenge would be like the communication between the instructor and like the students. Like say like some students have some difficulty like expressing themselves, like they're more introverted than extroverted. So even if they have like issues they want to bring up, like some students might hesitate to do so. So like having being able to have that common ground between the students and the instructors would help a lot to implement like UDL practices, I guess. So.
What parallels do you see between good information design practices and principles of UDL?
Like the hierarchy is a big thing, and that is a big thing with the UDL of getting that engagement. Because if you don't have good hierarchy, then you don't have anything to follow, and you can lose your audience pretty quickly.
The process thing of just like understanding your audience, because as an information designer, that's basically what you're doing. You have your audience, you design for your audience, and that's like a fundamental like feature of all design. And then that goes in forth with like UDL, because it's your audience who you're like working for.
I see the interconnection between service design and UDL as universal design kind of focuses on the various types of people and the way they interact in their environment. And service design is exactly that, because if we picture going to a coffee shop, you can either do like mobile order or you're physically waiting in line, and then the things that you see on the way to your line to impulse buy, like to get you to impulse buy, and then even your experience up to the cashier and then waiting for your drink too. So it's like a whole process. And I think that involves everyone, because anyone can just walk into a coffee shop, any various types of people. I think that's how I see the interconnection between info design and UDL.
For UDL and like good design, I think the parallel will be how information is like delivered so that the audience could understand it better in the way that suits them. So it's like chunking information into like categories, so it doesn't overwhelm the learner or like the audience. So like in terms of like the UDL, like the comprehension and like good design works alongside each other, I think.
I went for a very specific goal of info design, but I really like the knowing your audience. Like that's a really cool idea that you had, Jordan, because that is it. Like you know your audience and you're creating it for them. And then I think with the UDL too is that you're also creating it for the audience you don't know, because you're creating it for inclusivity without having to share that. And that's like I think it goes back to one of the questions that we had before, but the challenge with it is that because not every disability is visual, your audience, there is like a layer where you don't know, so you just have to implement as much as you can of these UDL principles so that so that your design is strong enough to not strong enough, but do you know what I'm trying to say?
I think so. And that like initiates like the feedback cycle too between like facilitator and like audience, or like designer versus audience, like that kind of stuff. Like, and then that's where you get like continuously better design, and you get like better UDL practices within the classroom or whichever you can goes along with that.
That you're designing for those that you don't know too.
Yeah, that is
because you can do as much research as you can, but until you do those like customer interviews almost, where you speak to people on the street of the community you want to research, you only then do you know like their raw opinions and that things that you might not even have heard of before.
As designers, we become better designers with that feedback and implementing those, like you don't necessarily know what's going to be best for somebody with a different ability than you, right? And so when you implement that feedback, you gain a stronger understanding of what your unknown and known audiences need.
It's such like a complex problem. You could almost do like a how might we on this, because like Because you just like there's so much to go. Like someone you could have both two people with like social anxiety, but both people like need different like needs. So it's just like so complex. What is the UDL principle that you most appreciate being used in your own learning?
Another great point that was brought up before was like the provide options for comprehension. So circling back to proper design and presentation of the information. I feel like I learn way better with anecdotes that, for example, instructors provide versus just reading straight off the slide and nothing else, because I feel like you can definitely tell the passion that comes through with that, and then also connect it to like my own experiences too, versus read this slide, there you go.
For me, like we're like designers and like we're like graphic and visual learners, so I feel like the use of like graphics and like visuals and like videos and the course content that we are provided with, I think I learn more efficiently with that, instead of just like giving us like multiple readings to go with every week. Videos and like websites that we review, I think it's more efficient for me to learn, I guess.
I feel like we're very fortunate to be in this program because every prof is so empathetic and like it's something like even at the beginning of the semester when Ben and Kelsey sent out that Google form, I I can't imagine because I went to school at U of C in a smaller college in BC, and I could not imagine any prof sending out feelers just to see how you were doing. Like it's awesome that we have that kind of support here, you know. UDL principle that I think that I really align with is and appreciate is probably engagement. And the reason why I say that is because I am like a hands-on learner. It's something that I've discovered as have gotten older, but I do not do well without an example. Like I need you to tell me what you want and I will do that. But if I don't have that, my brain just like I can't visualize like what you're expecting, and I can't like my brain just short circuits. So for me, the engagement and having that the ability to discuss and like see what you want, like that's what I need for me.
Yeah. One practical accessibility strategy that you will take with you within your future instructional design work. One example that really resonated with me was facilitate personal coping skills and strategies. So yeah, earlier this year, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, and I could never pinpoint it, or like I couldn't understand why I was having trouble focusing, or I would just have random episodes where I'd fall off the face of the earth for like a week and then forget about any kind of deadlines. And I think the fact that this UDL guideline was acknowledging personal coping skills really resonated with me. It's reminders, models, checklists can help learners in choosing an adaptive strategy for managing their emotional responses to external events. So like strategies for coping with anxiety producing social settings or reducing task irrelevant distractors. I really like having a checklist so I can keep track of my progress versus my brain pinging in 10,000 different directions and I just start breaking down because I can't handle any of it. But if I have like tiny bite-sized tasks to do, then it's less anxiety inducing. It's like a holistic approach too, because it's almost deliberate. If you don't work on it constantly, it'll affect every facet of your life, including school and work. So I think UDL involves those coping skills too.
And I thought that was like such a good point because I picked like the self-regulation one, just promoting like expectations and goals, because I know I can kind of fall off and like just kind of go into my own world and like forget like that I have all this stuff due and just be like, oh no, it's fine. Like, and I just like I don't know, get in my head about things, and I'll be like, I have no time, and then I have too much time. And I just feel like having those expectations, those goals set, and like regulate myself in that way, I can kind of streamline my work, which I feel like once I get into a career will be super, super important. Right now, like you have more time on your hands, but like once you're in a career that is way more like steady, that's going to be so much more important at that time.
Do you guys find that you like when you do find stuff that works for you, like those setting those goals or like those reminders, what do you like how do you get to that point where you're like, this is a coping mechanism that has worked for me? Like how do you come to that?
I immediately thought of wellness services at school. So even throughout the summer, I would do sessions with my counselor, and that made me almost like reframe my thoughts. So if I would think, holy, I can't do this one project, it's massive, I could be like, how can I improve it or how can I break it down? And like learning how to be patient with myself. So I think it's not like I set this goal, now I feel better. It's almost like take my as much time as I need, and it's okay how long it takes.
Learn more about yourself and like spend time with yourself and learning how like your brain works, because I've had severe ADHD most of my entire life, but I just recently in like the last 4 years figured out what was going on. And then so after like finding that out and like spending more time figuring out like how it affects my brain and like how I work, I realized that like I need to like set a day or a time and a finish. And then I just need to go crazy in that time. Even it doesn't matter what I'm doing as long as I'm doing stuff. So like I'll start on something and then like 20 minutes later I'll be doing something else and I'll be doing something else. And then
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I got enough done that I'm like happy with it. So it's just like learning how you like learn and how you like work.
Throughout the years, I figured like I procrastinated more in my like first year and second year, and like in my third year and fourth year, I quite got past that kind of like mindset. So like in the UDL guidelines of like having like minimizing distractions, I think that would help. That helps best with me. So I figure like if I do like tasks I need to do in like 2 hour increments, I think I would be able to like get the tasks done efficiently. And like I figured like for me like to not be distracted, I have the tendency to like listen to like music in loud volume. It keeps me more focused on my work. Yeah, and like since like having like one screen, like just like looking into your like laptop and like switching between like two tabs if you're doing like two tasks at the same time, I figured like having like the external monitor at home where I can like have one task here and then one task there that I can do like together. I think I get things done more efficiently that way instead of like switching between tabs because I get distracted in that way.
Like a to-do list kind of gal. I love a to-do list and I have to have a to-do list or I will not get everything done. It's interesting because I feel like there's just like small things that I'm taking from each of you guys. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Like, and it's definitely like for me, the big thing has been the to-do list. Like I used to be terrible at time management and like it was a nightmare. And I was like, I need like if I don't have a to-do list, it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. And I just get very easily distracted and I'll get pulled away from it, from whatever project I'm working on. So implementing that, and then also like it's interesting when Gav was talking about the minimizing the distractions. Like when I came back to school at MRU, like a big thing for me, like when I was doing school, when I first got out of high school, I always had my laptop and I would, then I'd be like scrolling through, some whatever website and then it was just awful. And so when I came to MRU, I was like, I am not bringing a laptop. I'm not going to have these distractions in class because like it would pull me away and I wasn't paying attention. And so like knowing what I needed to do for myself to be able to focus and how to manage my time were the two big things that I have found that have helped me get through a semester.
Going off what you're saying with distractions, I learned that if like I draw in class, which like I feel like in high school and elementary, it was always like a slap on the wrist if I did that. It was the only way I could like listen and like focus because or else I'm like staring off into the distance, like I'm completely off. Like all my report cards would be like, Jordan is like off in her own world, like she's daydreaming all the time, like we can't get her to focus. And I was like, well, you're not letting me like do the one thing that like helps me focus. So then in like university, it doesn't really matter as much because no one really cares if you're doing you. I started doing that and like I would just be like remembering things like after and I was like, whoa, like this is like a coping way for me to like get rid of all distraction, distract myself, but also like focus at the same time. So I'm not like one falling asleep because if I'm like completely like unstimulated, I like just doze off, like just how it goes. But like, yeah, so that was just like such a good point you brought up, like that way that I like deal with that as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting too, because that is I did a workshop I attended a workshop on this, and it was about how we actually learn better when we fidget. And so they gave like in the seminar that they gave us these like kind of these wire noodles that were just like a foam thing that you could play with, and they're like when you see people fidgeting or drawing or sketching or whatever, it doesn't mean that they're not listening. That just may be how they comprehend, and most people actually learn better when they do that kind of stuff. So that's very interesting to hear how it has helped you.
What is one takeaway about learning that will take you into your future instructional design work?
I like that there's like no one way to learn. It's so like multifaceted. Everyone learns in a different way, and you just kind of have to respect that for what it is and just kind of go with it and just be like, you know what, this is just how I learn, this is how that person learns, and everyone's minds are different, so you can never like feel like in the wrong for the way that you learn or you approach a different situation. Because I know with myself, I'll like beat myself up because like in a lot of ways I feel like I can't like think the same way as someone else. Like when I hear people talk in like class, I'm like, how'd you like come up with that so fast? Where I would need like an hour to spend and like form my thoughts because like right off the spot I can't do it. It's just not how my brain works. But so I would always beat myself up. So I learned to tell myself that, Jordan, this is just not how you learn. This is not how you go. So you just need to be okay with that. That is just my learning style. So yeah, that's what I would say.
But like empathize.
We're all saying empathize, understand, be supportive. Like we are just all saying, like thinking like this very, safe environment for people.
Yeah.
I remember in a social innovation class, it was called Agents of Social Change. We were tasked with an empathy game, which was these like elaborate looking wooden pieces, and you have to try to make them in such a way that someone else assembled them, but you're blindfolded. So the person that is doing it is the doer, I guess you could say, and then someone that assembled it had one experience, and then there are 3 spectators. And then I was able to see the dynamic because I was the one blindfolded, and it was so hard to try to get that piece the way that the other person did by having someone else explaining how to do it to me, and I was blindfolded. So I think like I don't even know if that made sense, but the fact that the person was explaining it to me and I wasn't getting it, I was getting frustrated with myself, really gave me some perspective because the spectators were maybe thinking in their minds like it's so easy, you just put the thing in there and then you put the other thing there. But in my mind, since I was blindfolded, I couldn't do it to save my life. So I think knowing that empathy piece and just seeing how other people interact and the different lenses that they have really stuck with me, and I hope that made sense. But that's one takeaway that I took from that social innovation class.
It's just having the understanding is such a big thing for me, and for like how like things that I want to take into future instructional design, like the UDLs really aren't what are at the forefront of my mind. It's I guess the UDLs are a part, like empathizing is a big part of that. So it's in there, but it's really just like, how would I want to learn this? And then how would my brother is like the very polar opposite of me. He'd rather look at a book and read it,
Yeah.
not me. Like, so that's how I do it. Like, how would I want it and how would my brother want it? Like, and then, I mean, those are just two people, but like there's just so many people to take into account and understand how it may make sense to me, but it may not make sense to the person beside me. Like, I guess that's part of that empathizing workshop that you did at Ivy, where it's like, you have a different understanding, even though the words are the exact same thing. Your understanding is totally different because you don't have the same perspective, right?
Yeah. Even in a family dynamic, like even though you and your brother are related, you process things completely differently. So that's really fascinating.